Hello, I'm Cheryl McCarthy. Welcome to One to One. If orange is the new black and 50 is the new 40, in New York City, brown is the new garbage. I'm talking about those brown garbage bins that sprouted up on almost every street corner a few months ago. That's when the city started requiring every New Yorker to compost their household leftovers or else run the risk of being fined. What exactly does composting involve? And are New Yorkers getting on board with the program? For that matter, what happens to the stuff that goes into those brown bins? And where does it finally end up? Here to answer all of these questions is Joshua Goodman, Deputy Commissioner of the New York City Department of Sanitation. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Cheryl. I appreciate it.
So, what does the composting law require New Yorkers to do?
So, it's very straightforward. We say that if you cook it or you grow it, you throw it. Anything from your kitchen, anything from your garden, separated from your trash into a discrete container. It can be the brown bin you mentioned. We've also opened up the rules, and New Yorkers can use any bin that they like, 55 gallons or less, with a secure lid to keep out the rats. And this is all designed to be simple. And I know we're going to get into it today, but I often tell people who say, I don't know how to do this, I don't understand what it is, I guarantee you that if that's how you feel, it's because you're overthinking it. New York City has had composting programs sort of on and off since 2013, so for the last dozen years or so, but no program previously had ever reached more than 40% of New Yorkers. They would grow a pilot, and then they would withdraw, and it would stop, and it would start, and it would hit budget cuts, and then it would go on pause, and then it would come back. It was so much drama, and that's why people today go, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, right? There were so many stops and starts. And so what happened is that in early 2022, when Mayor Adams and then Sanitation Commissioner Jessica Tisch came in, one of the first conversations that they had was, the mayor said, I want the last curbside composting program New York City will ever need. The one that's going to stick, the one that's for everybody. And so we at the department got to work putting sort of good government best practices into motion to design a program that would work for everyone. No complicated signups, no special days to remember, no different locations, just every week on your recycling day, everything from your kitchen, everything from your garden, set out and put to beneficial use. And that's what's now enshrined in the law.
So that is what individuals are supposed to do. What are buildings supposed to do? Are we talking about only residential buildings and restaurants, or are we talking about office buildings as well?
At the moment, this is just residential. Some businesses are required to source separate their compostable material. That's actually under a law that's been around since 2013, Local 146 of 2013. The law is vastly out of date. It literally sets standards for whether a business has to compost or not based on how many chairs that business has.
Oh my goodness.
It is it's from a time when composting was this little niche program. And we're actually working with the council now on an update to bring commercial composting requirements in line with residential requirements. At the moment, we're talking about residences. Every residence in the city receives free weekly or multiple times a week collection from the New York City Department of Sanitation. And just as for 25 years, the building has had to put out separately its metal, glass, plastic, paper, there's now one more material type. Okay. That food waste, that yard waste, just has to go out separately so it can be put to beneficial use.
This new initiative, was it handed down by the Department of Sanitation, or was it the City Council voted in?
This ended up being a collaborative effort. The administration, the department, as part of the administration, was rolling out a universal curbside composting program. We began in the fall of 2022 by bringing service to all of Queens. No full borough had ever had service before in those prior programs that I mentioned. And then we expanded from there in the fall of 2022 to all of Brooklyn in the fall of 2023, and the remaining 3 boroughs in the fall of 2024. And in late 23, the council codified that timeline that we had previously announced into law, and also set an April 1st, 2025 date when, even though it became mandatory as soon as you received service, they set a date when enforcement could begin.
Right.
And that's what happened earlier this month.
Now, when I remember to compost, to take stuff to the compost bin, I go down there. I take it down in a plastic bag and I toss it in the bin. Should I not be doing that?
You are absolutely welcome to do it in a clear plastic bag, which I assume is what you're doing. this is one of those examples, things I mentioned, where it used to be so much harder. For a long time, there were all kinds of rules. Oh, no bag, you have to put it straight in the bin, and then you have to wash the bin, or you can put it in a paper bag, or only the compostable bag that you have to go buy the special bag. When we were designing the current version, the final version of the program, we looked at so many different barriers to entry that kept people from composting. And one of the ones we heard was, well, I want to line my bin with a bag, or I want to throw items away in a bag. We said, well, instead of trying to get 8.5 million New Yorkers to change their behavior, what if we just changed our behavior? And we bought a special machine that lets us filter out those clear plastic bags. So you are good. And that's just one example of how I tell people, I guarantee you, you're thinking too hard about how to do this.
Now, our building has started out with, it looks like a fairly small bin in the basement for the whole building. I assume that as more people get in the habit of composting, that bin would get larger, but they can also take it to the bin on the corner, right?
Yes, many parts of the city have these orange corner bins. There are 400 of them citywide.
Are they orange? Did I say brown?
Well, there's two different things. The one you use at home is brown.
Okay.
But these ones that are out on the corner that you might want to walk to, those are orange.
Okay.
And that was something that we piloted as part of this program. It's been very successful. You probably see them out on the street, a big orange bin that just says compost on the side.
Okay.
You open it with your phone. And they were opened to almost 2 million times last year.
Okay.
So people love them, we love them, and they're not going away.
Okay, I don't want to lead people to the wrong color bin. So it's
No.
So it's orange on the
The
corner.
orange one's in the corner, the brown one's at home.
And brown in your building. So the curbside pickup is on the same days as recycling. How often
Correct.
do you pick up recycling?
So that's once a week for
Okay.
now. Now, we always have said for the decade plus that we've been developing composting programs that eventually what you're looking for is this. Your trash goes down as your compost goes up. So I've had people start to ask, well, someday will it be 2 times a week? The way the trash is, most of the city trash is either 2 or 3 times a week, right? We're nowhere near that point now, just because we're still helping people ramp up their participation. But obviously that's something we're looking at long term.
So where does the stuff end up after it gets picked up?
So there are a few options, and I always remind people that when you have your kitchen waste, your food scraps, your yard waste, you're just done your gardening, whatever, there are 3 things that can happen to that material. It can either go to a facility where it turns into compost, and we produce about 50 million pounds of compost a year, which we give away free to New Yorkers. It can go to a wastewater treatment facility where it becomes renewable energy to heat and power homes in the city, and also to reduce the city's reliance on fracked gas. Or you can fail to separate it properly, and it can become nothing. If you put it in the trash, all that happens is it goes to a landfill and it becomes rat food and it becomes greenhouse gases. So if you separate it properly, it's going to either become finished compost, the largest facility is on Staten Island, but there are others, or it's going to become renewable energy, and the largest facility for that is the Newtown Creek wastewater treatment plant in North Brooklyn.
Okay. How do you turn it into compost? I mean,
Right,
final
what
product.
happens, right? So we take it down. Let's just use the Staten Island facility as an example because that's the largest. It's a 33-acre site where millions of pounds of food scraps and yard waste are laid out end-to-end in what are called windrows. And we recently completed a major upgrade of this site where we now have a new piece of equipment called an aerated static pile. An aerated static pile looks like the world's largest bowling alley. It's a whole bunch of these rows. And you fill these rows with the food waste. And over a period of about 3 months, air is blown in from all sides, the aerated static pile, and the material is turned and rotated. It'll, just because of naturally breaking down, reach an internal temperature of 140 degrees. The stuff
Wow.
gets hot as it breaks down. And as we turn it and rotate it and blow the air through it, it turns from some of the grossest stuff you'll ever see into black gold, the compost. And then we bag the compost up in 40-pound bags. We sell some of it to landscapers. We give a tremendous amount to the Parks Department, other city agencies, and we give about 5 million pounds a year directly to New Yorkers for free.
Okay. Now, it's mandatory as of April 1st. How is the law going to be enforced?
So there's a few pieces to this. The first thing about how it's enforced is to remember that we've been enforcing requirements to separate your waste for 25 years. It's always been, not always, throughout many of the last decades, it has been the case that you could get a ticket for putting, bottles and cans in your garbage. You could get a ticket for putting cardboard in your garbage.
And how would
Sanitation
you know?
supervisors come by, and these are experts in their field, and they're there doing a lot of things. They're checking to make sure it was put out at the right time, that it's in the appropriate containers, and they can look at it and they can see context clues, and then if necessary, they will open your trash.
Like letters with your name on them?
Well,
That
it's
kind
what building is it in front of?
Okay.
Right? The summons is always written to the building.
Okay.
And so if there's recycling in the trash, if there's food waste in the trash, it's this building's trash, this building gets the summons. And during the first 2 weeks of April, we wrote about 4,000 summonses for failure to separate compostable material. After those first 2 weeks, the mayor announced that we were going to focus the enforcement on only the largest buildings that are the most consistent violators. We're going to spend the rest of the year doing a little more outreach and education on the smaller buildings, but I always tell people, don't get out of the habit. Any building may receive a fine for failure to compost, whether now or at some time in the future.
But individuals cannot get fined.
Well, the building, right? And then it's going to be up to whether the property owner to figure out who is responsible for that.
Okay.
But just like if there's litter in front of a building, if it's not set out at the right time, a summons is written to the property owner.
So even though the law enforcement went into effect April 1st, you rolled that back.
Well, we're
Temporarily,
focusing
right?
a little more on the outreach and education to small property owners. And then summonses will be written through the end of this year to larger buildings, 30 or more units, after they've received a certain number of warnings. And smaller buildings will continue to receive written warnings. We're just going to, you may come home and see something taped to the front door, a warning saying, we were here, we saw that you weren't doing it.
Yeah.
This is the law, you've got to do it. So we're seeing tremendous results, even with an outreach and education period continuing. The second week of April, when we had been doing enforcement, was the highest level of compostable material diverted from landfill in a single week in the city's history. And that record was broken by the third week, and that record was broken by the fourth week.
Okay.
So we're seeing tremendous buy-in from New Yorkers. The numbers are really moving in the right direction.
You said that the city had made efforts at composting going way back. And did it get up to 40%? Did it get that high?
At one time, 40% of the city had access to the program. That
I
doesn't mean
see.
everybody was doing it.
I see.
Right? But this program that became citywide in October of 2024 is the first time that all New Yorkers have been able to have composting at their home.
Okay.
Right? Never before have we had an equitable, easy-to-use system like this that reaches every corner of the city.
And I know that certain pockets or neighborhoods where you had maybe more hip New Yorkers have had composting programs
And there were
of their own.
small-scale ones. But I'm glad you brought that up about sort of the cultural aspect of it. You might be surprised, as I know a lot of people were. I mentioned that in the fall of 2022, we started the modern iteration of the program in Queens. Right? We took those first 3 months, the fall of 2022, and we were able to develop a really interesting A/B comparison because at the same time that program was running in Queens, there were 7 districts around the city's divided into 59 community districts, right? There are 14 in Queens. There were 7 others that were running an older legacy version of the program that was targeted at sort of the hippest New Yorkers, some might say, right? Of the 14 districts in Queens, which had never had composting before, when we rolled out our newer, easier to use model, 8 of them diverted more material than the best performing district in the old program, which was Park Slope, Cobble Hill. And 1 district, Jamaica and St. Albans in Southeast Queens, diverted more material from landfill than the entire 7-district old program combined. So when people say to me like, oh, composting, that's for a certain kind of person, we always tell them, look, the beating heart of the compost belt in New York City is not Park Slope and Cobble Hill and Carroll Gardens. It is Jamaica, St. Albans, Southeast Queens. It is increasingly places like Bay Ridge and Bensonhurst. It's places like Kingsbridge and Kingsbridge Heights in the Bronx. We are seeing tremendous buy-in in places that may cut against a kind of conventional view of a composter because we designed this program with equity in mind.
Right, right. Does the city, what is the composting program? What does it cost the city?
Well, the idea is that long-term this is a cost savings program, right? Because one of the most expensive things you can do is send your garbage away.
Yeah.
Right? It costs the city $450 million a year to send our trash out of the city.
Yeah.
Whereas our compostable material stays in the city, it's put to items of beneficial use. So it's not an additive, there is money allocated for it, but it's not an additive cost to the city budget because it is going to reduce the need for waste export over time.
So we talked about composting, and there's recycling. You've been recycling since when? Since when?
Consistently since the late 90s. There had also been pilots and starts and stops and other programs, but consistently since the late 90s.
I gather New York's recycling program has not been as successful as in some other cities?
You know, it's an interesting question, and it's one that's actually a matter of debate. You'd think those numbers would be straightforward, but about half of recyclable material in New York City makes it into the proper bin. Now, we view that as a pretty good, that's called the capture rate, how much of it we get. We view that as a pretty good capture rate. There are some other cities that report higher overall diversion rates, how much total material is kept out of the waste stream. And then some people say to me, well, you know, aren't their numbers better? And I say, you know, it's my opinion looking at the data. I actually just think our number's more honest.
Yeah, yeah.
We obviously want that to be higher, but one thing that's really interesting about recycling in New York City, there is kind of this cottage industry, I'm sure you've encountered this, of people who make a living or a personality out of saying, I heard recycling is fake. I'm smarter than you because I know the truth that recycling is fake. It doesn't make a difference, right? They're like so proud of themselves because they think they know this secret knowledge that recycling doesn't matter. And I always tell them, it absolutely matters. That kind of cynicism only serves people who have a vested interest in continuing to pollute our society, right? And you probably know that in 2017 and 2018, many cities in the United States had trouble selling their recyclables. They were impacted by a policy change, a domestic policy change in China that meant that...
You mean selling the stuff?
The stuff, exactly.
Okay.
China enacted a new national policy that made it much harder for US cities to find a buyer for their recyclable plastic. New York is actually, and so people often cite that to me. Well, I heard recycling stopped working in 2017, 2018. New York City was actually protected by that because of by long-term contracts. We were one of the only cities that had no impact because of that.
Yeah.
We also didn't chase, there was sort of a hot trend around 2015, 2016 for single stream recycling, meaning put the paper, the metal, glass, and plastic all together and figure it out later. That turned out to be much more expensive and much less effective. And we were one of the few cities that resisted and said, well, let's not do that. Let's wait and study it a little longer. And a lot of the cities that did it have now walked it back. So I always want to say, I'm going to look right at the camera and say directly to New Yorkers, I promise you, your recycling matters.
Okay. You know, so I can't help but ask you about, I'm going to call them the bottle and can cleaners that you see around the city. How much is the deposit on a bottle or
It's
can?
5 cents. It's
5 cents? Okay.
So those are people who...
Price hasn't gone up despite inflation?
It hasn't. There's been a discussion about making a change in Albany to update it and possibly to expand the kinds of bottles that includes. We're open to that as part of sort of a broader recycling reform package. We think there are some issues with the current bill as written, but I think that as far as the folks you're referring to, the canner community, we at DSNY appreciate anybody who's trying to keep recyclable material from ending up in the landfill.
Right.
The only thing that we say, and that's true even if someone is doing it to make ends meet, right? The motive doesn't matter as long as they're doing the right thing. And the one thing that we do enforce and that we always remind people is just don't make a mess while you're doing it.
Yeah.
Right? Don't rip open bags and leave them there, But beyond that, if somebody's not making a mess, they're getting the recyclable material into the recycling, and who could be upset at that?
Before the program started, we were talking about what you call the trash revolution.
Yes.
Tell me, what is that?
So for about 3 years, New York City has been engaged in what we call the trash revolution. The trash revolution is a tidal wave of change meant to finally end the primacy of the black bags of trash on our streets. Right? For 50 years, since 1971, so more than 50 years now, New York has been alone among its peer cities in not only allowing the trash to go right on the street, but actually saying that's where you're supposed to put it. Right? You walk around cities around the world, and you don't see this. You don't see the big piles of trash that take over the sidewalk at 4 p.m. So starting in 2022, we began a very concerted effort to completely reform the relationship that 8.5 million New Yorkers have with 24 million pounds of trash a day. And, this work and the work of the sanitation workers in particular in dealing with it is literally Sisyphean, right? And people often say like, oh, what a Sisyphean task. And they just mean it's hard. This is literally like Sisyphus because there's 24 million pounds today, and then they get rid of them, and then there's 24 million pounds the next day, and then they get rid of it, and it comes right back. So what we've done over the last few years is a very exhaustive study of the volume, weights, and placements of the trash to determine viable European-style container solutions that are going to work in New York City. And we're starting to see the first on-street containers, just like you'd see in Europe, and they also use them in South America and parts of Asia. The first ones in North America are rolling out in West Harlem right now. And I think
The first ones in North America?
That's correct. It's funny, urbanists who I talk to often say, every other city does this. Why can't you just copy paste? And I always say, show me a city in North America that uses an on-street container system. Oh, well, no, I guess I was thinking of Barcelona and of Madrid and of Buenos Aires, which meant we had to build all new trucks. We had to develop an incredible amount of software for this. And we're really going from worst to first on our trash solutions. And it's getting results. We're seeing citywide rat complaints go down by double digits every month. And historically in New York, rat sightings only go in one direction.
Right.
So that's an incredible change. And in some areas where we're piloting more aggressive solutions that we expect to expand, we're seeing drops in rat sightings of 60%. I mean, it's the kind of thing that in government you never see a program that's this effective. And composting is part of that. It gets the rat food out of the black bags and into a separate container. But everything that we're doing, I think that in just another couple of years, we will look back and think, I can't believe we used to live like that.
Now, I don't know how big the containers are, but is there a lift on the truck, or do the sanitation workers?
It's a new side-loading truck that lifts the bin up.
Wow.
And when we started studying and figured out, because there are different models, some go around the back, around the side, there were a lot of reasons that we felt that what's called an automated side loader was the right approach for us. And then we said, okay, they use this in some parts of Europe, but the European ones, you can't just buy one. They're not allowed on New York City streets or on North American streets at all because we have different emission standards. So estimates we got from the industry was that it would take about 5 years to design a new one. We said, can't do that. So we got creative. We did what only the public sector can do, and we were actually able to get a prototype in about 10 months. So that's what's going to start rolling in just a couple of weeks.
In East Harlem?
In West Harlem.
In West Harlem.
In all of West Harlem, and so right around the start of June, you'll see those trucks out serving every part of that neighborhood. It will be the first fully containerized part of New York City, part of the United States, part of North America.
Okay. You talk about education efforts, try to get people to understand what composting is and to think to do it regularly. What kind of efforts are you making?
Well, we did a lot of door knocking. We knocked on about 270,000 doors. We gave away 200,000 free bins for the compost. We sent mailers to everyone in New York. It's an interesting question about how to engage people, and one that I struggle with every day about this stuff, because so many people don't want to think about the trash, right? They think the point is I put it out, it disappears like magic. But that's not how it works, obviously. We all have a part in this sort of circular economy. And so engaging people on it and getting them to see the benefits of it, those 5 million pounds of free compost that I mentioned, that's an outreach tactic, right? That's a huge part of it, especially when we deal with kind of a tinfoil hat crowd who say, like, I bet you don't really make the compost. Well, what did I just give you?
Yeah.
So, the written warnings that I mentioned, we did about 30,000 in the lead up to April 1st. And we're going to continue educating people. We have info sessions. We're in the schools. We do everything we can to get people to know that trash is cool, but you've got to dispose of it properly.
So what's the end goal in this?
Well, the end goal is to reduce how much trash goes to landfill, to put this material to beneficial use, right? It helps the environment, to get it off the streets in a way that fights the rats, and to get people to be really, I want to say thoughtful about it, but not too thoughtful, because the point is it's easy, right? I spend all day thinking about the trash, but you shouldn't have to spend all day thinking about the trash. That's the point. I want to continue to develop programs that work for the people. And we have this problem, sort of like we say it's, at the department we like to joke that it's like a Sartrean problem, that in some ways we're sort of the last the last devotees of Jean-Paul Sartre at the Department of Sanitation, because everybody sees a giant pile of trash bags. But does anybody see the absence of a giant pile of trash bags? Does anybody walk down the street and think, for 50 years there was a big pile of trash there? And
Where
now
did
there
it
isn't.
go?
Exactly.
Right,
So
right.
We deal with this kind of being a nothingness question every day. If we get to the point where no New Yorker has to think about the trash, that's great. That's a win.
Well, I hope that this show will enlighten our viewers about what composting is and get them to do it.
I hope so too. It's easy, it's fun. You can learn more at nyc.gov/curbside composting.
Okay. I'm afraid we're out of time, but I'd like to thank Joshua Goodman, Deputy Commissioner of the New York City Department of Sanitation, for joining me today. To learn about our upcoming shows, you can follow us on Instagram at One2One CUNY TV. And you can watch the show on the go by downloading the CUNY TV app. For One2One and CUNY TV, I'm Cheryl McCarthy.